Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of This is Leadership, your intersection between growth and leadership. And we're continuing on the series. This is part 2 of the series talking about the book Disrupt the Status Quo. And I'm so excited to welcome Dr. Matthew Joseph here today, who is currently the Director of Evaluation, Supervision, Mentoring, and Hiring in Brockton Public Schools. And he is also the CEO of X-Factor EDU Consulting. I just like saying that, like X-Factor
Yeah,
EDU.
it's pretty strong. I
Yeah,
like it.
consulting and publishing. So, Matthew, thank you very much for making the time. Welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you. I'm psyched to be here and get a chance to meet you and expand, the reach of connecting with folks. The book I did before this book was called The Power of Connections, and this is perfect. This is exactly what I am driven by in this profession, is to meet inspiring individuals like you, have a conversation and learn from that authentically. I think we need more of that in our field for sure.
I hear you. I love doing the same thing. And that's the number one reason for the podcast. So, I've had a French language podcast for the past 4 years, but decided, it's time that I go and be able to meet with my English speaking colleagues and
Oh, there
just
you go.
expand, right? And that's what it is. And if we can actually take these conversations and be able to share them, well, I'm sure, I'm always convinced that there's somebody out there that's going to, end up listening to an episode of a podcast and end up helping them as well. So
Absolutely. I share that all the time with individuals who are starting to come up and saying, do I want to write a blog? Do I want, like, if one person reads it and it makes a positive impact on either their lives or the lives of their students, it's worth the time. Like, that's what we get in this field for, right?
exactly. So listen, Matthew, how about you? We'll start off with, so that our listeners can get to know you just a little bit more. So whatever you'd like to tell us about you, tell us
Sure.
tell us a little bit about you so we get to know you a little better.
Yeah, I won't go into a full digital resume, but I'm from Massachusetts.
Okay.
I'm chatting with you from just about 40 minutes west of Boston, Massachusetts. And for
Okay.
those American football fans, I live the next town over from where the New England Patriots play, of Foxborough. So I am a lifelong educator. I was an elementary school teacher for about 10 years, and then I quickly realized that I was not a great teacher. I was good. I wasn't
Mm,
great. I
mm,
liked bigger picture thinking. I liked to work with visioning and mission. So I went into being a principal, and I was a
yeah.
principal for 11 years. And from there had an opportunity to lead a district, to go one-to-one. So I left being a building principal and went into the district leadership
Yeah.
side and was a director of digital learning and had a chance to work with Apple and work with Tech and Learning Leader and FETC. And then one of the things similar to what I share a lot in the book of Disrupt, we have these norms of what people think of you. And I was starting to be seen as the tech guy versus the tech leader. And
Mm,
I just, like I typically do, I'm like, screw it. I'm going to now just be a district director of
yeah.
curriculum. And I moved I was executive director for teaching and learning. And now I do work to support educators in their evaluations and instruction. So more of a district leader now.
Yeah. So a little similar to what I do now. I've been teaching since 97. I think we're just about close when we started our career in
Mm-hmm.
education. I started back in 97 and been a school principal since 2006. But for the last 2 years, I've also been a district principal, coaching, the principals in our boards and whatnot, and organizing the PD and all the other stuff
Great.
that
Yeah,
we do
it's
in that kind
exciting.
of role. So I think it's a great portfolio to be able to come and have that calling, right? So it's like, there's something either bigger or like bigger picture thinking that you'd like to put into place and like to be able to put out there. So I know exactly where you're coming from, because I've had
Yeah,
those similar feelings and those thoughts, going through my career in education, 9 years in the classroom, and then, a school principal since 2006, but not just ending with the job, right? It's always expanding, always like meeting people like yourself and growing and learning and being able to bring
absolutely.
that back to the system, right?
Absolutely. And we get stuck in these kind of, this happens, then this. You're a good teacher, then you're an
Yeah.
assistant principal, and then you're a principal, and then you're assistant superintendent, and you're a superintendent. And that's not the pathway for most individuals, and it's not always what people want to do.
Yeah.
Listen, I have my superintendent's license. You introduced me already, so people know I have my doctorate degree. I had no interest in being a superintendent. I want
Yeah.
to do different things, and it's okay to do that. And I think the last, I don't know, 5 years in this space, that's one thing I've been really, pounding the drum with,
Mm.
that you can do something in this field that inspires you within whatever role it is. It doesn't have to have a title even. If you are passionate about something, and as you know, I'm 51 years old, about
Mm.
mid 40, I'm like, okay, I want to get other people's voices out there. And that's kind of where the district shift went into
Yeah.
and working and in the writing space and the publishing. And we can do that in our field. We just get locked in sometimes to pathways and roles.
Yeah, but it's got to stem from passions, and I 100% agree. You know, we spend so many hours at work. I can't even imagine going in every day and it not being my passion, or not enjoying it, or not getting laughs. You know, of course, there's some days that are tougher, but in
Absolutely.
general,
Well,
to
it
be
is
able to
work.
go in, yeah, to be able to go in and just do what we love, you know, that's not even work. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Yeah. Enjoy it.
So, you know, acting director, evaluation, supervision, mentoring, and hiring in Brockton Public Schools. But I guess, like, because you also have, you know, the X-Factor EDU, right? Consulting.
Yeah.
So I got to say it again, the
You can say it
X-Factor. I
anytime
love
you
it.
want.
Yeah, I love it. So tell us a little bit about that. So what's that all about?
So we'll go back like 10 years when I was a principal. I had an opportunity to start doing, and this was before, you know, it sounds like funny to say, oh, it's before we started putting tech in schools. Well, it
Yeah.
was. I'm again older, but I had an opportunity to work with Apple to launch a one-to-one district like 17 years ago, and I was way too young to know any better. So a district was like, hey, can you do that in a school of mine?
Yeah.
And I was like, sure, let's do this. So I started to, you know, I was a principal way too soon, but I had the skill of having an educational leader and an ed tech background.
Yeah.
So we did that in our school, and it went really well. So I had an opportunity to speak again, probably before I should have, but I had an opportunity to speak. It was a little immature, but grew into the role, right? And I
Okay.
learned some things to do and not do. And along the way, what happened was I started to have these opportunities to speak nationally, and I wanted to capitalize on it
Yeah.
on, you know, district leadership side. So my middle name is Xavier. So I was like, okay, for all of you who are looking to get into that space, don't do it as yourself, not because you don't want to be known as that, because never wanted to leave the public school. So it was a conflict of interest for Matt Joseph to do it. So
Okay.
I started an LLC, and I needed a
Mm.
name, and I'm like, okay, this is what it is. So I started to do that and speak and travel, and I had a blast. And then I met Brian Aspinall, you
Yep.
know, one of Canadian mates from Codebreaker,
Absolutely.
and I published my second book with Codebreaker, and we kind of hit it off. We had, you know, very similar pathways and similar drive to do things different. And I started to introduce him to some of my speaking friends from America, and he said, "Why don't we create an arm of Codebreaker for X-Factor Publishing? So you do your speaking thing, but
Mm.
now you start to bring in some individuals who have similar backgrounds as you."
Yeah.
So about 2 years ago, he was a real mentor to me to get the business side going. And similar to what I think he did, went from an individual entity of speaking and writing to bringing in a team of folks.
Yeah.
And so X Factor Publishing launched with my first book, Stronger Together, and then we've been going, you know, strong for over a year. And Codebreaker and X Factor partner really closely on a lot of things. Even today, Brian and I had a phone call with a
Yeah.
prospective author and fit better with my team, and that's how we kind of roll with it. So that's where it came about, from that passion of lifting others' voices. I've been at this a while,
Mm.
and I've learned a lot. And for those of you who read Disrupt the Status Quo, I've failed at a lot of things and got back up. And it was time for me to share that with other individuals, because in this space we get caught up too much in the you have to be perfect, or and I did too. Like, if
Yeah.
you weren't always the one who had all the knowledge, then you weren't in charge. Well, that's not the fact, and that's not the truth. And that's the lane that I want to take with X Factors. We take chances. We, you know, the our motto is be unapologetically you, and however you are,
Mm.
then be the best you can be.
Mm. I think that's awesome. Similar path myself. You know, following just an incredible experience that I was able to partake in. You know, for 4 years I was on detachment or secondment to the Ministry of Education here in Ontario, And that's when I was able to, to travel all over the province of Ontario and, outside of Ontario as well, but mainly just coaching school principals throughout the province. So that's where I discovered, that love. I think it was always there, but I never realized it, that love for leadership development. And, my goal was do anything that I can to bring that kind of support to, school principals, because in my opinion, we just didn't have it, right?
Right.
Whatever we could find, we found it on our own. And if, we could always participate with some of the stuff that we had going, some PD stuff that we had going for teachers, but to really be able to bring in that coaching part of the job, not just a district leader, but let's get somebody in there, that knows how to coach and is able to accompany these school principals throughout their journey of growth. Because, like John Maxwell says, right, everything, rises and falls on leadership. And that's 100% true. So, ever since then, that's when I've taken off myself, and that's my quest, right, is just add value.
Awesome.
And to be able to, especially when it, for the school principals and leadership teams at that level, to make, I want to make sure that they'll have just as good and a positive experience as I did, to get the feeling that it gives me, to know that I'm growing and to become better, is what drives me. I want them to taste that, because I know that if I can just get them to taste it, they're going to want it every day.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah, sure.
So I went through last question, and we'll get into the book. So I went,
Sure.
Of course, I went through your website, and I'm discovering you. So I had seen you on social media before, but I had never really had the occasion or to really dive in and discover, what you do and with X-Factor especially. So I'm discovering a lot of really, really cool stuff. So on your website,
Awesome.
of course, I went and checked it out, and I seen all those incredible books that you wrote. And of course, the recurring theme that I've noticed is connection, right? So you wrote books about connections, about mentoring. And maybe, the last question I can ask you before getting into the book is, when talking about or when considering connecting with others, what is it that you look for when connecting? What's important to you? So, so the people that are listening can really, intentionally hone in on that, and maybe be really intentional tomorrow morning when I go back into my building, to look for these particular things that you're willing to share on connectivity.
Sure, absolutely. And that was a big part of the drive to write Power of Connections, because we see this all the time. You go to events, you go to these big things, and you meet people and like, hi, how are you? And then you leave, and that was it. And it always felt inauthentic to me. And it bothered me, because when I wanted to meet somebody, I wanted to learn from them. I wanted to be better. I wanted to say, okay, here's what I can offer. And I've learned a lot from you in this short time. Like, why are we not capitalizing on that? You don't always have to be the center of attention. So the question was like, you asked about the connection. For me, it's authenticity. What are you going to bring? When you see me at an event, and this is what I look like. I have a golf shirt, a t-shirt, a baseball hat, a backpack. And I love it, because people are like, oh, okay, I wasn't expecting that. You're a doctorate of education, or you wrote this. Like, but this is who I am. Like, this is me. And I think for those that you are, as you said, go into work tomorrow, be who you are. Because what happens too often in our field, and I've seen this, I've experienced it as a young leader, is you go into a situation trying to be somebody else. I tried to play the part of a principal for a while, and it didn't work out. So we go to these events and try to be somebody else, and like, I'm going to give this persona of whatever it is. And then you develop this partnership with other groups or a professional learning network, and it fizzles out because everybody's playing a part.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I have found the best connections, is when I go to an event or I meet individuals. I was just in Austin last week, and it's like, this is who I am. This is what I want to learn, and here's what I can offer. And this week alone, I've made connections with individuals that I learned about STEM, which I'm not well versed in. Esports, I'm not well versed in it. And even to say that, like, it's okay to say that, as long as you grow from it. So to answer your question is, be who you are and be proud of that. Have that confidence to say, this is what I do. Here's what I can offer. We're really bad at this profession of owning our own successes.
And I think it's a great segue into getting into the book, because you guys actually talk a lot about that, about being yourself, but being able to have that courage, to speak your mind and really to speak up when the time comes to speak up, especially if it's something, that goes against your values, or if you're not feeling comfortable, how can I communicate this, of course, in a positive and constructive way, but not be afraid to be able to show, the people, who we are. And you're absolutely right, Matthew. When I first started as a principal, of course, it was like when I started as a teacher, I was probably teaching like how I was taught. Right.
Right.
And then being a teacher, having had, X months of principles, well, some of that will rub off, of course. And then I'll think, well, this is how I got to do it until I realized quickly enough in my first year that just wasn't going to cut it. Right. And I couldn't lead a school like somebody else did. I had to lead the school the way that I was going to lead it based on who I am.
Yeah, in the first, 2 years, I'll say, of my principalship, it wasn't going great. And what bothered me the most, it wasn't that we weren't succeeding, it was that I was not succeeding trying to be like somebody else. Like
Yeah.
my superintendent would say, because again, I was a little too young at that time looking back, but she would tell me, do this and say this and send this out. And I'm like, just doesn't feel like how I talk. It doesn't feel like my cadence. I'm a very verbal person. I'm a very visual person. I'm a very go visit classrooms. I'm not that behind the scenes manager, and it wasn't going well. And that's what I tell young leaders: succeed and fail as you. It'll feel better when you succeed at something when you're your own self. And if it doesn't go well and you're authentic, you at least know how to fix it.
Yeah.
When our students weren't performing and I wasn't leading as somebody else, I didn't know how to correct it. I was tied to this superintendent to go back to her and say, okay, this didn't work. What should I do next? Okay, this didn't work. I never had that confidence to succeed and fail as myself. And I think that could be another, point about making connections, is that you want to make authentic connections as yourself, because
Absolutely.
then you feel confident with who you are, and you feel confident reaching out. And I think it just really brings you forward in your own profession.
Absolutely. So, of course, we're talking about Disrupt the Status Quo. Here's the book for the
There it
people
is.
that are looking. Absolutely. For the ones that are looking at this video on YouTube, get out there, get the book. Amazon, it's available on other websites as well. Then, as I will do for the other authors that I had as guests on the podcast, Matthew, I will link up all those. I'll put all those links for the people to be able to find the book and order it, of course. And all people need to do is go to the website, inspireleadership.ca, in the podcast section, and everything will be there. So you got to get out there and get that book. So let's get right into it, Matthew.
Sure,
one of the first things, let's do it. So one of the first things that popped, I had many things that popped up, as super interesting. One of the first ones in the introductory part of the book is you talked about, how we need to be an expert in people, and maybe not an expert in, subject matter and whatnot, or processes, but when it comes to leadership and when it comes to, disrupting the status quo, we need to become, experts in people. So can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and that's in reference to, my introduction section talked a lot about being interviewed, and how we often interview individuals by just the pedagogy or curriculum knowledge or background or skill. And what happens is well-read individuals can repeat things that they've learned.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean they're still not, a negative person, or they're not a good colleague, or they're not a good partner. I think there's things as leaders that we can train or give training on. I can train somebody on how to adapt curriculum. I can't train someone on how not to be a jerk. And this goes back to the first thing it said, is succeed and fail as me. We were hiring people in my first 2 years who were from an Ivy League school, who had a great GPA, who could speak the language. Now, we obviously want intelligent folks, but I want someone who's going to say to me, why are you wearing a hat in an interview? Or is this a professional, like, to push back? I want someone to challenge me in a professional way. I want to have professional conversations. I want someone to say, I'm a first-year teacher. Can you come teach a lesson and help me out? And when we get those individuals, and this is the heart of the Connections book, when we get those individuals who are driven, as you said earlier, and who are willing to learn, I'll take those at any day. The best teachers I hired, to be honest with you, when I was my first years as principal, and it saved my job, were second career teachers.
Yeah.
What I mean by that is, two of the best teachers I hired, one came from Fidelity Bank and one came from an insurance company, because they came in and had a work ethic of, this is the job I'm going to do. And they had this different drive than the college kids who came in almost a little entitled, like, here's my curriculum course that I wrote in college.
Mm.
And when you get to know and invest in people, then there's an emotional attachment. And it's not about failing, it's about, I don't want to disappoint somebody. And we have a shared accountability.
Yeah.
And when you invest in people and you have a shared accountability, that's where the success is going to come in, because you can withstand setbacks. When you have a shared accountability, you can withstand setbacks because there's going to be some, or more than some.
Absolutely.
And if we pretend like there's not, and we don't have the grit and bandwidth to overcome it, we're sunk.
And I think that we have to take a look at some of those interview questions too, right? So I know
Absolutely.
in my district, we've been doing it this year in regards to different positions, but and we're also, taking a look again at job descriptions. Some of those positions it's not something we think about, but it hadn't been reviewed in, I don't know how long, since I've been here last year. It's been many, many, many years. And having been a principal and yourself as well, I've sat on, I don't know how many interview panels where, it's the same questions that you're asking, but it's so typical. And sometimes you'll get somebody that'll come into the interview, but they've interviewed already maybe 5 times before. So they're getting the same questions.
Absolutely.
It's unbelievable. So, let's look at these questions and see, what kind of questions can we ask to find out more about the person. And it makes me think about a little bit what, one of the stories you were saying in the book about how you would bring, some stuff to the interviews. And I thought that was super interesting.
Yeah, because let's talk about what you're actually going to do.
Yeah.
Like, the question, tell us about your background.
Yeah.
What makes a good lesson? Let's talk about when a parent sends you a nasty email. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
When a kid tips over a chair, and how do you respond? Or how are you going to give positive affirmation to students who are doing what you ask them to do? Like, and because when you put them in those situations, it's how they respond. And even, even today, one of the things you said is, about questions. I don't want to know the questions. I want to have a conversation. I want to talk. I want to fumble a few times, because that's real. Yeah. And the more we can model being real, the more that individuals starting in this profession see that's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay to fumble through. I've done countless interviews and podcasts, and I'll fumble through some more. And that's normal. And when people are way too scripted and I need to know the 5 questions, here's going to be my 5 answers.
Yeah.
It's fake.
Yeah.
And what it does is actually it's a detriment to the younger generation of individuals coming in, because they think you have to be perfect.
Yeah.
When man, did I fumble a lot as a new teacher, as a new principal, as a veteran principal. And that was a big, a big heartbeat of this book, is to say, it's not about being perfect. It's about not stopping to try and grow.
Mm-hmm. And I think that element of people, and this is in my experience as a school leader throughout the years, I've seen people, being burnt out more because they're trying to be perfect versus they're being themselves, but maybe making even more mistakes. It's so much pressure to put on your shoulders to try to be perfect and have that perfect lesson. And it's just, it's bad. I think it's all around bad, just for the individual, not only for your practice, what you're putting out to your students in front of you. What message are you telling them?
I agree.
They see you, they observe, we know the kids see everything and they feel everything. So they'll see it. So they're going to get that same impression. And then at the same time, they'll see somebody that's tired, that's at their wit's end, that doesn't have any more patience, because they're never getting that satisfaction of that perfection. Right.
100%.
Yeah. I think it's crazy. And I think it's a question we need to ask. So it'd be a great interview question too.
Yeah. I agree.
if you're feeling like you're at the end of your rope and you're feeling burnt out, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
What questions are you going to ask yourself? That would be an awesome interview question.
Yeah. I'm totally edu borrowing that. I'm going to use that.
That's awesome. So, okay. So I think that's great. Now another piece, I think it was in the introduction as well, that I found really interesting, was the whole concept of toxic positivity.
Yes.
So I thought that was interesting because, we have a tendency, of course, of when we think about toxic environments and cultures and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
We think of that, but I'm like, yeah, you know what? we also have toxic positivity, and that can be tricky.
Absolutely, because what it happens is, oh, you're great. Your session was great. That lesson was great. Your clothes are great. This is great. When somebody then gives you constructive feedback, you don't have the stamina to take it. If
Yeah.
I've been told that, I do conferences or whatever, and 10 of them, all like my cheerleaders, are there and they say how great they are. And then when someone gives me feedback, it's like, whoa, I don't know how to handle this. Whoa, they hate me. Or as a teacher, if you're told
Yeah.
how great your lessons are every day, and then your administrator changes and someone comes in and
Yeah.
says, okay, let's try this or let's try that. Oh, I don't like the new guy. Nope. No, I don't like that. I'm not
Yeah.
going to listen
Yeah.
to that feedback.
Yeah.
So it's not about being toxic. It's about we're skewing reality when everything's great. That's not reality. I think I've learned that along line. I know you're going to interview, or I think you might have interviewed Daphne already. She
Yeah.
edited, my book and edited this book, and you got to take some hard feedback. And yeah, I've learned that coming up, and I always say that, like, I'm a big boy. Tell me, because I'd rather know. And I think the toxic positivity creates a culture in a school where when things don't go your way, if you think everything's always great, you can't come back from that.
Yeah.
Listen, I'm a positive person. I
Yep.
think, in the short time, I think you can get a sense of my personality and
Absolutely.
attitude. I'm not saying be negative. I'm just saying be authentic. Because when someone says to me, like, "Oh, that's a great job," it's like, you weren't even in there. How do you know I did a great job? Like, I want someone to tell me that it went well because of what, or the next time, try this. And it's
Mm.
like that means more to me to develop school culture and an individual's confidence than just complimenting them all the time.
Yeah, and we want to bring that to our students as well, right? Like when we talk about
100%.
giving
Same with the
giving the
kids. Yeah,
feedback. Yeah. Yeah.
you
So
need to have that grit to overcome some tough times.
and we'll see it, and there, the area or the time that I'll see it the most, or that I'll hear about it, is our graduating students. They leave for post-secondary, and then some of them end up just hitting this huge brick wall, because throughout maybe high school, they maybe didn't have the opportunity to have some of the teachers that were able to give more of that constructive feedback. And I was always, the student might have always been belting out 90s and 95s, of course, going back to marks. So
Right.
then when you get to, like you were saying, it could be another teacher, but when you get into another setting, when like post-secondary, and then you get somebody that says, oh, hold on a second, did you think of this or this or that? And then they just run into a wall, right? Because not only are they questioning the whole thing, right? They're questioning themselves, they're questioning their learning, but they haven't actually developed that not coping mechanism, but the competencies and the skills to be able to take that feedback and then to know what to do with it.
Right. And that's where it's, turns into a toxic community where
Yeah.
a group of teachers get together that are like, oh, he gave me this negative feedback. He's criticizing me. And then it turns into us versus them.
Yeah.
When at the end of the day, it's about we all want to get better. And I think that's part of the disrupt part that you're talking about, is that it's about growth as a team, all of us getting better and having those hard conversations. I call them professional conversations. It's okay to have them. We have to have them. It's not, there's a difference between criticizing and critical feedback.
Absolutely. And I know that I've been living it. I'm in a new school district now. It's my second year as a district principal. And they've got some fantastic processes in place with the team, the way the teams work, and everything's based on Pat Lencioni's work, which is fantastic work when it comes to building teams, and having and building those environments where you can have those kinds of conversations, telling each other the real stuff, but without taking it personally, right? And
Absolutely.
just the different environments that I've had the opportunity to work in, it's wow. It's just the positives and that accountability, and the bar when you're when you're able to work and develop a work environment in which we're able to talk to each other like that, and able to push each other, and able to tell each other those things, and, we have confidence, and we're confident in ourselves. We're able to be ourselves, but we're able to speak to each other to make sure that we're accountable. The bar is just at such a different level. It's just unbelievable. And the things that we can accomplish, there's no limit.
I agree. Fully agree with that.
Yeah. So I think that's great. And Matt, now you also talked about a little bit further on in the next chapters. You touched a little bit on delegation. You had talked about, how at some point, I think we all realize we can't do everything ourselves. So, man, that's hard to let go of that control. If you want it done right, you got to do it yourself. And we've heard that so many times. So you talked a little bit about it. So, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I learned early on that, one of my biggest regrets, to be honest with you, is when I was a principal in my first role, I took over a school that was underperforming, and for lack of a better word, we were scoring about 65% of our kids passing our state test.
Okay.
And by the end, we were close to 90 passing. And this was going great. Like, things were wonderful. I got, accolades for it. I got a big job following it. And a year later, the school I left went back to underperforming.
Okay.
And I quickly realized it wasn't because I was such a great leader. It's because I was doing everything. I was working 17-hour days. I was helping classrooms. I was helping kids. I was tutoring. I was doing everything, but I didn't empower one person. They got swept up in the Matt Joseph show, and my enthusiasm was contagious, and people were driven, and people worked hard, but I didn't create any systems. There was nothing that stayed in place that supported students long term if someone wasn't running around with their hair on fire to fix everything. So I learned in my next role as being a leader and part of why I give back blocks, that's still a regret of mine that happened for those students in that community. I mean, they didn't fall off the map. They're still doing well, but they didn't sustain it because I didn't empower individuals. So delegating for me, and what I wrote in the book, was that it wasn't until I got out of the way and let the teachers have a voice. It was in the voice section, and they just had better ideas than I did. I just had to let it roll. And the delegation isn't about giving up all the control. I stated, this is what I wanted to happen. I wanted teachers, going back to the connections thing, I wanted teachers in other teachers' classrooms.
Yeah.
I had a way I wanted it done. They were like, we don't like that way. And I was like, oh, okay. As long as we can have, I had to prioritize. Was it more important that it was my way, or was it more important that we got the initiative off the ground? And for me, my big goal was to have teachers in each other's classroom. I had to swallow the fact that it wasn't going to look, wasn't going to sound, wasn't going to be named, but I wanted to. And it wasn't until I stepped back and then I saw what the end goal was, and I'm like, that's way better now, way better than I could have done. And the teachers had ownership. So I learned that really fast, that when you delegate, it creates ownership. And then the teachers ran with it, and it was awesome. And I think that the biggest piece of the delegation is giving ownership and accountability to other individuals. Going back to one of the first things I said about shared accountability, then we have a shared stake in this together. And that's where the real success is.
And I learned through experience, that delegation, that shared leadership is an extremely powerful piece, because when you speak about ownership, and what ownership gives you is the drive, right? Because especially if a teacher, wants to do it, or comes up to you and says, listen, I got this idea and this is how I would like, or is interested, chances are they might even be more passionate about it than you are, and end up, producing something that's way beyond even what you had imagined.
Yeah, it was way better. I can admit that. I wrote it, I put it in print.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
Oh yeah. And we have to be, right? So so I think that's a really, really important point to consider. So for everybody that's listening, delegation is great. It doesn't mean that you're, pawning off your responsibilities. That's not what it is at all.
And
a team is
show weakness.
That's right. It's not a weakness piece, right? It's really an empowering piece. Like you said, you're empowering others to be able to have that leadership opportunity. And everyone can be a leader, but sometimes, we all need, not sometimes, all the time, we all need to be pushed, and we all need to be challenged. We all need to be put in at some point, outside our comfort zone. So I see it as opportunities, shared leadership opportunities to provide, staff members and team members, those occasions to be able to, not only shine, but to grow
I
and
agree.
shine too, because, celebrating
Yeah, you want
successes
them.
is important too, right?
100%. I agree with you.
Yeah. So, and reading a little bit further, something else, obviously something else, jumped to my eyes, which I thought was really, really interesting and worth talking about because it could be a potential pitfall. You talked a little bit about fake positivity.
Yes.
Yeah. So I thought that was really interesting when talking about toxicity. Toxicity. Yeah, I said that right.
Toxicity. Yeah.
Yes. So, so Matt, can you tell us a little bit about what you meant by, that fake positivity?
Yeah, I think when we get caught up in this, everything has to be joyous. If we're always happy and we don't have bad days.
Yeah.
And it goes to the same thing as if we're not authentic. Like there's some Mondays I just roll in. I'm like, I don't want to be here today. I'm tired. And I'm not saying I'm not coming to work. I'm not saying I'm not going to give my best. But we have to be honest with each other. And there's some days you have to have that colleague, and you're just like, hey, I need 5 minutes. Can you just, chat with me for 5 minutes? And when we are like, again, I'm a positive person. I'm not trying to say we shouldn't be positive, but when it's positive at the expense of skewing reality, that's dangerous for our students. And I think that's where a lot of some of the stress comes in, or we have to perform, we have to be on all the time. That if we can't talk about sometimes that we overcame something, then when students feel that they're not happy or they're not at their best, they'll never tell you ever. And then they're like, I'm great, I'm great, I'm great, but they're not. And until same with staff, how are you doing today? I'm great. And then they're like crying because they just had a rough night. Like, I want to know that, and I want to support you, and I want to teach your class, and you take a walk, whatever you need. I can't support you if I give off the aura that if you're not always in a good mood, then you don't belong here.
And I think it's a little bit of a pressure too, because maybe we feel like we need to be that for others as well.
Yeah, and we have to always be on, and we always have to say we shine. We're going to put glitter everywhere, and trust me, I was an elementary teacher and principal. I'm all into the tchotchkes and glitter, but at the same point, I'm also into the I need 5 minutes to have a hard conversation. I had an argument with my son before I left for work, and I'm really upset about it. Like that's life. And we work in the human service business.
Yeah.
And we work with people all the time. And if we can't be honest and we can't open up, listen, I'm going to be positive. I'm going to promote you. I'm going to be your biggest champion. But I'm not going to say it's positive all the time. Our goal is to be positive all the time. And to get there, we have to have authentic conversations.
I like that. I think it's really important. You got me to thinking, just a few moments ago, you talked about, being positive is good, but being always positive is not maybe what the person needs, right? So if somebody's coming in and, like you said, they've had a bad day, they've had an argument with their son or their daughter or whatever it is, maybe they don't need that person saying, hey, how's it going? And, maybe they just need more of an empathetic, sympathetic ear where it's not, at a level 10 in terms of energy.
Right. Take it down a notch.
Take it down. You're still giving it out, but I think you're just transforming it and giving it out a different way.
I agree. Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
So I think that's really important. And I think it comes back to that piece of, we talked a little bit earlier about wanting to be perfect. I think it comes, and we see it all over the place on social media as well, and it's great, people posting, classroom pictures and all these great things that are going on. But sometimes if we don't know if we don't know how to interpret that information that's on social media, for example, you could give that impression, especially for a new teacher, that, oh, okay, so this is how it's supposed to be. I got to do all this stuff in these boards and these lights and this show and every day. And we can give that impression, if we're just solely basing ourselves on the information that's coming through in social media.
Absolutely. And I think it just gives a real lens to the work that we do.
Yeah. So, for the people listening, make sure that you find your somebody in the school that you're able to have those conversations with. And I think it's really important. But as the old saying says, make sure that you surround yourself with the right people. So if I am going to
Absolutely.
somebody that I need, that I need to lend their ear, or that person needs to lend their ear for me, I have to make sure that it's somebody that's going to be objective, that's going to be empathetic, but like we said before, somebody that's going to still be able to support me, but also, tell me how it is when it's time for me to hear it
So
as
true.
well. You know
So
what I'm
true.
saying? So you listen, Matt, it's been a fantastic conversation.
Well,
I
thanks
got
for having me.
I've got two questions left for you.
Okay.
And this first question here, like you said, I did record the episode with Daphne, so that was fantastic. And the one question that I like to ask, that I will ask, and I'm going to ask you, all the authors of the book, is the title. So, Disrupt the Status Quo. What does that
Yes.
mean for you?
What it means for me is we have to break the norm of the way we always did it. If we're always saying this is the way we always done it, and we don't question it, then we have to do things different. And one of the things I always say to leaders that I work with, if you were to start over
Yeah,
your school, your district, would you do it exactly the way you're doing it right now? And if the answer is no, then why are you doing it that way now?
yeah,
If you're running meetings or you want to do something, try something different. And it's okay. It's okay to do that.
absolutely. I think that's great, Matt. So, listen, if somebody would like to get a hold of you, what would be the best way to do that?
Well, I could again rattle off these all sorts of things, but I think the hub that you'll find the most information is either follow me on Twitter at Matthew X Joseph. You'll find a lot of links there, or if you go to my website at xfactor.link, you'll be able to find resources, articles, information for sure. So I think those two would be the hub to get there.
Awesome. So I will link those up in the show notes. So, for the people that are listening to this episode or watching it on YouTube, head on over to inspireleadership.ca in the podcast section. Matthew will have his own page with a nice picture of
All
him
right,
and all
look
the
forward
links.
to
So it's going to be
it.
awesome. It'll be there, and we'll link in the book, of course, and your website. So we'll get all those goodies in for that. So, listen,
Awesome.
Matthew. I said two questions, but really it's three because I just asked you how we can reach you. So, last
Yep.
question for the people that are listening today, what would be your one wish for them?
Well, my one wish was that tomorrow you make somebody smile, that you do something that makes somebody's day tomorrow. And I think if you do that, not only are you going to support the other person in their day, you're going to feel better about you've accomplished something. It's not about you, it's about how you're going to make others feel. And through that, that shared leadership and shared accountability is we're all going to get better.
That's beautiful. 100%
Uh,
agree with that. So often, I'll come into work and I didn't have a good morning, or I'm in a bad mood, and that positivity that I was able to put out always comes back. So you end up helping yourself. You think you're helping
Absolutely.
others, but it just ends up coming right back. So I think that's great, Matthew. Thank you very
For
much.
sure.
So
Awesome. Well,
listen,
thanks for having me.
well, thank you for being here. It was great meeting you and
Great to meet
discovering
you.
you. And I'm looking forward to keep in touch and maybe get you on a podcast again someday. So that would be great.
You got
But
my number now.
yeah, I do. I got your number. So really appreciate you spending this time with me today.
All
And
right. Thank
listen,
you.
I hope you have a great school year, and we'll be talking soon.
Sounds good.